Welcome once again to Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
So we have been going all day long and just sat down, had to literally do a breathing exercise to kind of regroup and refocus and get our minds clear for what we wanted to talk about. And as tends to happen, we didn't really have a subject matter in mind, but it came kind of instantly with some preliminary conversation. And so today I wanted to talk about value, both how you value yourself and maybe are you operating in some judgment as it pertains to casting value on others. What do you think?
Well, you know, for me personally, and I can only talk about me and my experience, right? And just project that onto others as I usually do. But, you know, with all of the accomplishments I've had in my life, I still, if I hear something wrong, I hear something sideways, I tend to take it personally, and I tend to have it create a wound where probably none is intended, or even if it is, so what? You know, it's weird that you can have a baseline of a worth, which we all do in the world. We all bring our own unique perspectives and environments and backgrounds, and find ourselves in situations, I believe, that are not accidents, and that we can bring unique skills and abilities into a given situation. And yet we sometimes don't act on that because out of fear or a perceived slight. And it's curious to me because I don't, there's no logical basis in it. It just seems to happen. Kind of that right brain, left brain thing we've been talking about is pre-conscious. Yeah. And I find myself in the middle of a situation doubting myself when there's no logical reason to do so.
You know, as I think about value and the struggle I've had with, I'm going to call it professional value, for lack of a better term, I can think back to my work history and how the arena in which I was employed paid very poorly, and paid very poorly for many, many years. And despite the fact that I had longevity, I had almost a decade in radio as an industry, you know, traditionally paid what, $13, $14, $15 an hour on a good day. And so, you know, as I've aged and I'm now deeper into my career, I still have this perception that my value is only worth a few dollars an hour because that is what I was compensated for the work that I was doing. And it really had no direct equation to my skill or my professionalism, but it had everything to do with I worked for very low income nonprofits. And that continued on afterwards. And so I think that has been my struggle. And then if you have the opportunity to present yourself to a new business partner, a new industry, and they say, how much do you want for this role? Man, that's a tough thing to come up with when you have been underpaid, and I'll say undervalued, just as a generic placeholder, for potentially decades.
Yeah, and you know, the way salaries and compensation are determined in our society is pretty suspect. But I will tell you that it's all based on a formula these days. I mean, they're gonna look at your skills, they're gonna look at the job, and they're gonna combine those two a little bit. Mostly heavy towards the job, mostly weighted towards what the job pays in that area. You know, from a business standpoint, I've heard and been in conversations where, you know, you have, let's just call it a grocery store comes into town, and you want the best cashiers. Coming in and saying, okay, we're going to pay $1 an hour more than everybody else is paying, is not seen as a useful thing to do, because you'll possibly raise all of the expectations in your area, and you won't necessarily get better talent for it. And so from a corporate standpoint, you're saying, okay, well then why would I do that? Why would I mess with the ecosystem? I should come in and offer what everybody else does and try to interview for the best people and do it that way. But again, there's very little of the individual in that. It is almost like you're a number, right? You're a classification, And that continues for all levels, frankly.
Yep.
And so, you know, how do we value certain positions? You know, if you're a social worker or a teacher or a daycare worker, a lot of folks in the service industry put in a lot of work, and they don't. The society has decided this is your level of pay for that work.
Yeah.
And you know, what do you do about that? I mean, is there something to do about that?
I don't know in this moment, but I feel like that's a question worth examining at a higher level. But you say, you know, pay for a role. I instantly think about those parents that stay at home and raise kids with the intention of, I'm going to invest my time, my effort, and my skill into this next generation. I remember seeing some kind of spoof video. I think that this was an experiment that legitimately got conducted, but it was Zoom interviews, a mock interview. The applicants did not know that it was a mock job. They thought it was a real job, but the interviewer begins to ask questions like, you know, so are you okay with being available 24 hours a day? And like, no. You know, are you available if the associate falls apart and needs you to interact with them immediately? You know, no. And all these things, you know, and you can see the sweat, and the people being interviewed are getting more and more nervous, and just the asks are utterly ridiculous. And, you know, the interviewer finally says, oh, did we say what the title of this job was? And they said, no, I don't think so. It's like, oh, it's a mom. Right. You know, and then the sigh of relief and some nervous laughter. But, you know, back to that concept of what does society place as value on a parent that stays home and watches a child? More and more it's, oh, you're just a stay-at-home mom, or you're just this or just that. Where this is, you know, case in point with that mock interview, it's a crucial job. It's all demanding, all consuming, and yet society has now kind of poo-pooed it because it's not a profession. That's right. And it's not, it doesn't happen with pay. I'll give you a real-time, even more close to home example, and that is caregiver. So if you're a caregiver that's dedicated to a person who needs care, you know, how is that valued? How is that valued in society? How is that valued within your own family? Yeah. If you're the one who lives closest to mom, right? How is it valued? And how is it valued within organizational caregiving situations? So, as an example, if you have a medically fragile child in the state of New Mexico, you as a family member can be paid as a caregiver for that child. So you can either get an outside caregiver, or a family member can actually be paid to watch that child. And that varies state by state. And it does vary state by state, but most states do that these days, and it's a Medicaid program. And then, so how does that work, right? If a family unit decides as a family unit that one person is going to stay home and care as a caregiver, how is that valued in the family and by society? And by the way, caregiver is one of the toughest jobs in the world. Oh, without question. And there's very little break, you know, there's no reprieve, I guess I should say. And, you know, then back to the question of how does society value it? Well, isn't it something along the lines of $12 an hour? Yeah, I mean, that's on a good day, as you said, with the radio station. You know, if we kind of break all the paradigms and think for a second, you know, my watch can tell me how many steps I've made. It can tell me when I'm going for a jog or a workout or a rowing machine or a bike, and it can differentiate between those two. Those even. Could we imagine a day when your watch keeps track of your activities, and then you are compensated in some way based on the activities that you're doing for the day? It's an extension of what we call the gig economy now, where we have several jobs, and you know, I'm an Uber driver, and I do this, and I do that, and I do this. And then, you know, you kind of rack your hours by your cell phone. It's not too much of an extension to have your watch tracking all of your activities, and then you're compensated somehow
for each of those activities, and then society would put a value on those, and we could go forward. Now, you could still have levels of value. You know, the brain surgeon, while they're in surgery, should probably be higher compensated than, you know, someone who's baking a loaf of bread, although as I'm saying that, I'd rather have the bread than the brain surgery. And that's a bad example. And this is the problem. We get into this issue of valuing people.
Yep.
And it's not about valuing people, it's about valuing the work that they do. I have many friends who are fellow engineers who at the later stage of their life have done other things. And you know, owned laundromats or gone off to do this or that. And one owns the subway down here at the end of Eubank at a gas station. And so there was value for them working for a W-2 paycheck as an engineer. Now there's value accrued to them being the owner of a restaurant or a laundromat. And so, and back to what is the work, you could have that same brain surgeon be a caregiver in a different way, and their compensation would go from $80,000 an hour to $18 an hour.
Yeah.
Right? And so we do have, as society, right or wrong, a value of certain kinds of work, and we do need to disassociate that from the value of the individual.
Yes.
And I think that's a large part of the problem.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people say, well, I should make more in my position. Look, your value as a human being is through the roof, no matter what you do. But the work that you're doing has a value in society based on an algorithm that we've all collectively decided on. We're all part of that problem and part of that solution. And so where does that all fit in?
Well, so I think that's maybe the curious question of the day, right? How do you disassociate someone's professional value from their personal value?
Exactly. And I think that this is a common thing in my experience growing up is, or my early career is, you know, first thing you ask is, what do you do?
Right. I think that's still #1 party question, right? You meet somebody new, hey, what do you do? And
then there's a value and a judgment based on that. I've got a very dear friend who was a major executive at a labs, like Quest Diagnostics that do labs. He decided in his later life he wanted to be an EMT, and he went to school for it, and he was the best ambulance person out there, best EMT, and thoroughly enjoyed it. Did it make him less valuable of a person that he was making a lot less? By the way, I would venture that he, in saving lives, probably was worth more.
Yeah.
But he didn't value himself based on what his salary or his position was. He valued it on where he thought he could make a contribution. Didn't bother him at all that he took a 90% pay cut to do that job.
But I'd be curious to know what, you know, his circle of influence felt about it. And I would imagine, maybe not to his face, but just because as a society we mistakenly place personal worth with professional value, you know, I wonder if there were some, you know, conversations that happened in the background. Oh, I can't believe he did that, and what a shame, and you know, some of the more derogatory comments, because it's really hard to disassociate those two things when much of our society thinks that way.
That's absolutely true, but I think it's critical that we do it.
Right.
And I think about my friends right now, and they're in various myriad occupations, from you know lowest pay scales to highest. I'll start there, and very different professions. And I'll say this out loud because I can tell you that I really appreciate my friend who was a Quest Diagnostics executive and now is an EMT, and is just retired from that. But I don't value him less because of that. I value him more. You know, I'm a little jealous that he's found in later life something that he cares deeply about and really enjoyed, and didn't care about the salary, right? I mean, to me, that makes me value him more. You're right, there might have been some whispers around like, wow, really? That's what he's choosing to do with the rest of his life? But to me, it doesn't. And I know I don't value the people around me that I consider friends based on their current salary or the job or their vocation or current vocation. And these days, that's even harder to do. I mean, it used to be you picked a path.
Yeah.
You were a plumber, or you were a brush salesman, or you were a, this. And you kind of did that until you got your gold watch, right?
Not anymore.
Not anymore. So who's to say that you should value anyone based on their vocation when that's going to change in 2 years?
So good questions to consider. I think the other element is, if you have had a bad experience with a particular profession, maybe you've been recently ripped off at an auto body shop, or you got misdiagnosed by a doctor and you meet somebody new that is in that profession, are we attributing negative characteristics automatically because of our personal experiences? So meet the new person at the party, say, hey, what do you do? Oh, I own an auto body shop. And you're thinking, oh, he's probably a crook, right? How do we turn off that judgment switch based on our personal experiences that we've had from somebody altogether different?
When you think about the preconscious and you ask that statement, I'm going to honestly say that I don't know that you can. However, I think we need to be aware that we're making those judgments, and that there might be an inference because of an experience that we need to be aware of and say, I acknowledge it and let it go. It's kind of like the art of meditation, right? I tried to meditate for a long time, and it's like, how am I going to quiet the 3,000 voices in my head, right? Yeah. But when I finally got to the paradigm shift of, no, thoughts are okay. Don't try to make your mind blank. Thoughts are going to come and go, but let them come and acknowledge them and let them go.
Right.
Don't fight them. Acknowledge, let go. I think that's the same thing.
Yeah.
Acknowledge, you know what, the last body shop repairman I met was a crook. This guy may or may not be. And let's maybe give him the benefit of the doubt and assume he's not.
But don't lead in conversation with that.
No.
I think having some genuinely curious questions to ask people is a really good tool. And that's part of what we were talking with John Freisinger about a few episodes back. And, as you even imagine stepping into a room of people that you've not yet met and you're making some new friends, I'll say, beginning with some of those questions and sincerely being curious about their answer, that would lead to a follow-up question and again, so that you're getting to know the substance of a person, very quickly diminishes any judgmental attitude that may have been present. And so, perhaps that same example, you meet somebody who's a auto body, store owner, whatever, and you have that thought that pops into your head of like, oh, it's probably a crook. And you stop the thought, and then you have to ask yourself, how can I really be curious about this person? And, begin that journey of, well, how did you get into that line of work? And, tell me about your store. Tell me about the people that you work with, and begin to have the questions that break down those mental judgments that have popped up instantly, and just push through them and begin to really seek after the heart of the person. Now,
the best way to do that is not to start with, what do you do?
Sure, that's true.
What are you doing these days that's fun? What are your hopes? Who lives with you in your house? What are you, where are you going after this? I mean, I have to tell you, there's every once in a while, my wife will say, so what does that person do? And I was like, I don't know. And I'm kind of happy to say that.
Yeah.
Right? We didn't start there.
Yeah.
So that's another thing, is to intentionally, not lead with that question. Ask something else. What are your hobbies?
Yeah.
What are some things, what are you doing with your spare time these days? And start there. Read any good books lately? What's the last film you saw that you didn't walk out of, right? Those kind of things.
Yeah. I guess I'm thinking, we're both people pleasers. I'm thinking about that very first introduction to somebody, like, so what are you doing after this? Comes on a little strong.
I didn't mean that.
Yeah,
yes,
but
right.
Some tempered questions of,
hobbies and how you're spending your hours. And
yeah, very appropriate.
There used to be an acrostic in my head of the H's that you can talk to with people as conversation starters.
Right.
You know, because, you know, if you're going to be at a networking event, and there's certain small businesses and other things that require that you go to networking events. And some people just hate those things. And it's like, well, sure, you can do that. But if it's important for your position, for the growth of your business, for sustainability in your life, well, then make it fun and ask people things that truly are interesting to you.
Sure.
And don't even talk about what do you do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's circle back real briefly to kind of our story that opened up this session, which is about personal value. And if we're struggling with how we see ourselves and our own value, let's say you're in a position where you feel like you're undercompensated or you feel like you're not getting the recognition that you need. How do we disassociate that in our own minds, because it's our personal experience that we're walking through?
Well, my first inkling in response to that, my first blink is to start writing down a gratitude list of the things that you're grateful for in that position. You know, starting with, you know, I have a job, I have people that I work with that I enjoy, I do, et cetera, et cetera. And
but does that speak to your value though? Does that prop you up and make you feel valuable?
I guess it gets me out of the judgment of I'm not being compensated fairly, or I'm not being treated fairly. Because I think we sometimes, I know I do, concentrate on the negatives versus the positives. I guess I'm just getting out of the state of judgment and more into curiosity about, okay, here's the things I like about my job. How can I do more of that? And if I'm doing more and more of the things I like in my job, maybe I care less and less about how other people see me or value me in that position, because I'm just having too much fun to care.
And I'm wondering if the gratitude list actually translates in many ways to things or items of value that you are contributing to the company.
Exactly. You're going to be grateful for those things where you see yourself have a positive influence.
So if you yourself find yourself stuck in that mental cycle of I'm undervalued, I'm underpaid, you know, kind of the woe is me, and I'm not casting a judgment on that, because I've been there many times over, but I think that is a very good mental exercise for us to begin to say, all right, that gratitude list, and then examining that list to say, these things that I love doing are values that I'm adding to the company, and therefore I know that I am a valuable team player. I am adding value overall to this role that I'm playing. And then conversely, as we're talking about other people, if you find yourself in that quick judgment of, oh, you're just a fill in the blank, or you're somebody who, you know, you distrust because of a past experience, to begin to break down those judgmental thoughts and to begin to ask some genuinely curious questions to get at the heart of the person.
Yeah, and this is hard too. I've been on the other side of this when you're evaluating people on a team. And, you know, you want to be one of those people on the team that people think, wow, I want this person around. And they add a lot of value here, and et cetera. And, you know, the ideal situation is you've got your management going, you know, I want to figure out how to give this person more resources, or more pay, or more recognition, or more influence. And I think that if we start there, you can create a virtuous cycle versus a vicious cycle of, okay, I'm not paid enough, and I'm not compensated enough, and I'm not, you know, respected enough, recognized enough, so, you know, I'm not doing any more than I need to on this. Well, you can know where that leads. Right? We've all been in situations like that, and that's not a good place to be.
Right. Well, I think we didn't do too bad for just having stuff spit out of the top of our heads. So as always, we love having you listen in, and we definitely love having any feedback that you have to offer. So please do find the Contact Us section at the bottom of our webpage, which is curiositynotjudgment.com. Just scroll down beyond the fold. You'll see it right there. Very easy to submit any questions or comments right there. We'd love to hear what's on your mind. So until next time, thanks for being part of our show.
Take care.